We're glad to be joined today for a conversation with Senator Todd Young of Indiana. Senator Young serves on the Senate Committee on Finance, Foreign Relations, Commerce, Science and Transportation, and Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Senator Young is a fifth-generation Hoosier. He's a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and a former U.S. Marine captain. While serving in the Marines and working as a business consultant, he also earned an MBA and a law degree, so a whole career of public service, private sector entrepreneurship, and now leading in the U.S. Senate. He was elected to the House representing Indiana's 9th District in 2010, then to the Senate in 2016. And Senator Young, I understand you still reside in Johnson County, Indiana, with your wife and 4 young kids.
That's right, Mark.
Well, good to have you with us for this conversation about antimicrobial resistance. I want to turn to that, but first just ask you, we're coming off the COVID-19 public health emergency now. There have been a lot of efforts to improve coordination and response capabilities across the federal agencies to address some issues that we're seeing there, some interest in emergency preparedness legislation that needs to be reauthorized this year, and that addresses a range of threats beyond just a pandemic. How are you feeling about the steps that Congress has taken and is considering to prepare for these future health threats?
Well, if there's anything that we learned from that global pandemic, from that 2020 timeframe, it's that we have to take every reasonable and responsible measure to address public health crises. Now, we have to navigate what waivers and flexibilities might be most impactful for patient access and improved outcomes. And Congress has been pretty active on this front. It hasn't always made headlines, but it's incredibly important. We've included provisions in recent appropriations legislation extending waivers to provide that certainty and stability to our healthcare community. And there's been very real progress. I know there's a lot more to do. And with some specific threats, I worry that we are already a step behind.
Well, I do want to turn to some of those potential threats. And you mentioned the waivers, the steps to help the federal government work more effectively with state and local officials, with healthcare providers in response. As you know, one of the areas where you played an important role, the Congress did, was in the development of innovative drugs, diagnostics, vaccines to address COVID-19. Those same medical technologies can be really important for addressing other kinds of infectious disease threats, including our main topic for today, drug-resistant infections. As you're seeing this work go forward on designing and funding programs related to health security, what are your thoughts about the development of countermeasures and support for their development against viral bacterial threats, including to resistant bacterial and other organisms?
Well, of course, this is the next public health crisis, by my estimation, and in consultation with so many others, the emergence of bacteria, which are resistant to antibiotic treatment. This is why Senator Bennett and I have partnered together on introducing the Pasteur Act. The CDC tells us that more than 2.8 million antibiotic-resistant infections occur just in the United States each year, and at least 35,000 Americans die as a result every year. By 2050, drug-resistant infections, which some call superbugs because of their toxicity and the extent to which they can spread very quickly, could kill 10 million people each year around the world. So that's not very far off. That's about 15 years. This impact would be more than the annual global death toll from cancer. Bacteria will always be evolving in new ways to defeat the drugs that we have at any given moment in time. So the new therapies are always going to be needed to address emerging resistance. We're, in short, in a race with these relentless microorganisms that we can't afford to lose. Despite the fact that antimicrobial resistant infections are on the rise, the global pipeline of the antibiotics we need is frankly insufficient, woefully insufficient. We got far too many drugs that are in development to treat the world's most dangerous pathogens. So we have to ensure that the United States isn't caught flat-footed again to another major global health crisis, in this case, a superbug outbreak. Some threats we can't begin to anticipate as we dream up all the various risks to American lives and welfare. But when it comes to this one, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, there's frankly no excuse not to be unprepared.
Well, you can certainly see it coming, and you obviously are paying a lot of attention to this issue. You've introduced the Pasteur Act to get at creating this market and support for bringing these new antibiotics forward. And you mentioned how thin the pipeline has been in the absence of support like Pasteur. So you and Senator Bennett, as you mentioned, have introduced that in the last two Congresses, just reintroduced it in this one. Do you think it's going to be different this time, Senator? Have the circumstances changed enough since Pasteur was first introduced? I know the bill has evolved a bit since its original introduction as well, but how do you see the odds looking in this Congress?
You know, I'm optimistic. I actually do think that the minds are starting to be focused on this serious threat, especially as we begin to get a bit of distance between the greatest threat of COVID to Americans and move away from that moment in time and look prospectively at not just the continued threat of different strains of COVID, but other sorts of threats. And we're preparing. So specifically what the Pasteur Act would do, in short, it would reinvigorate the antibiotics pipeline by providing a subscription-based financial incentive for broad public access to the latest, greatest, most innovative, high-priority antibiotics. Pharmaceutical revenue is typically tied to how much of a drug is sold. It's a volume business. Pasteur contracts would be different. We would instead pay for new antibiotics based on their exceptional value to public health. The approach would solve what is, by my reckoning, the core problem facing antibiotic drug development, which is the pressing need for innovative drugs that don't have high sales potential in the private drug market. You don't know if they're actually going to need to be used or used in a high volume. So as a result, Pasteur would not only encourage the development of new types of drugs, new antibiotics, but it would also help ensure that patients have access to these drugs once they come on market. It's kind of a Netflix model as opposed to a fire hydrant model where you wait for an emergency and you put out the fire. So it's really crucial that we get this legislation across the line, and a passage, in short, will I hope come later this year. Mark, we're getting a lot of interest from the outside. We have a fair amount of interest on the Hill, and the vehicle I see to get this done is thematically, it's highly consistent with what we're trying to accomplish. It's the reauthorization of PAPA for the uninitiated, the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act, which will occur later this year, I believe.
That's a great view of the importance of this issue, the opportunity in Congress. That's bipartisan legislation that needs to be reauthorized, as you mentioned, and having these antibiotics available, not for widespread use, but just when they're really needed. So you don't need more infection treatments, things like that. You're obviously on top of this whole issue. Just one last quick question for all of us who are joining this meeting today and are very concerned about this issue. Any further suggestions based on your experience on how to make people more aware of the challenge here and the opportunity to do something about it through Pasteur?
Well, I do think educating members of Congress continues to be very important. Members of Congress are very busy. Members of their staff are, by extension, often very busy. But to the extent we can empower those who are tuning into this webinar, for example, with the information to go lobby their members of Congress. I know we have a lot of sophisticated people watching. Nothing could be more helpful to us. So we learned on a tragic scale during the COVID-19 pandemic that these diseases don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. And this coming public health crisis is going to be an equal opportunity enemy to the American people if we don't take care of it in advance. So members of Congress are becoming more aware, but to keep seeing reports of drug-resistant infections, most recently the bacterial contaminated eye drops that made some headlines, suggest to me we still have some work to do. I would just encourage those who are watching to reach out to members of Congress and emphasize the human impact of this. And hey, there's a business opportunity as well. Yeah. There really is. You get a lot of great minds out there who are looking to change the world and maybe make a buck in the process. And in the world-changing part, which is what we care about, won't happen if we don't change the financial model.
Yeah, Senator, that kind of alignment is critical. And as you say, this is not a partisan issue. Protection for the country, it's important for all of us. Senator, thanks for your time with us today. And thanks especially for your leadership on Pasteur and so many other issues important for the nation's health security.
It's a privilege to be with you, Doctor. Thank you.